Hello! Welcome back to another evening of shared stories and adventures. Tonight, we're diving into the world of Stranger Things, specifically the plot holes that the series finale left us scratching our heads about. Now, I know the finale only dropped last week, and opinions are pretty divided on how it all wrapped up. Some people loved it, others thought it was a bit of a mess, and honestly, I fall somewhere in between. I'll be covering the biggest unanswered questions I can fit in for tonight, but there's definitely more to come. So, we'll start with the upside-down time freeze mystery, then move on to the characters who completely vanished, the water that shouldn't exist, the missing monster army, and the absolutely bonkers military resolution. Plenty to get talking about, but if you like what I do here and want a way to support the channel, consider subscribing down below. But for now, grab your Eggo waffles and walkie-talkie, get cozy in the basement, and let's begin. So let's talk about what is probably one of the most debated mysteries the series addressed. The Upside Down being frozen in time. This one has been driving fans absolutely mental since it was first revealed back in Season 4, and while the finale did technically give us an explanation, many fans felt it raised as many questions as it answered. To understand why this is such a significant issue, we need to go back to Season 4, Episode 7, titled Chibache Quote Grit. This is the episode that closed out Volume 1, and it's where Nancy Wheeler makes this absolutely crucial discovery. Nancy, Robin, Steve, and Eddie had entered the Upside Down through the new gate at Lover's Lake, which was pretty terrifying because of all the Demobats swarming around. They were trying to get to the upside-down version of Nancy's house to stock up on weapons from her secret stash. Very practical thinking, honestly. But when they got there, the guns weren't there. Now, this might not seem like a huge deal at first. Maybe Nancy just forgot where she put them or something. But then, Nancy checked her diary, and that's when things got properly weird. Her diary, which should have been full of entries from 1983 all the way through to 1986, just stopped. The last entry was dated November 6th, 1983. Nancy even says in the scene, "This diary should be full of entries, it's not. The last entry is November 6th, 1983. And that's when it clicked for everyone watching. The Upside Down isn't just a parallel dimension, it's frozen at a specific moment in time. And that date, November 6th, 1983, is massively significant in the Stranger Things timeline. It's the day that Will Byers went missing. It's the day that Eleven made psychic contact with the Demogorgon at Hawkins' lab, which created the first gate between the real world and the Upside Down. It's basically the day that kicked off the entire series. So the fact that the Upside Down is stuck on that exact date isn't random. It means something. What's really interesting is how this revelation recontextualizes everything we thought we knew about the Upside Down. In earlier seasons, we assumed it was just a dark mirror of Hawkins, a parallel dimension that existed alongside our world. But if it's frozen in time, that changes everything. It means the Upside Down isn't evolving or changing. It's this static snapshot of a single moment. And that has huge implications for how the dimension works, how Vecna operates within it, and honestly, how any of the plot makes sense. The problem is that Season 4 ended with this massive cliffhanger. The Duffer Brothers basically said, quote, according to an interview with Deadline after Season 4 wrapped up, Ross Duffer specifically said, quote, three phrase. So they knew this was important. They explicitly told fans that Season 5 would answer this question. And we did get an answer, though whether it's a satisfying one depends on who you ask. Season 5 reveals that the Upside Down is frozen in time because it's a wormhole that was created at a specific moment, November 6th, 1983, when Eleven made contact with the Demogorgon. The wormhole essentially captured that moment and has remained frozen there ever since. We learnt that the Upside Down is actually a wormhole connecting Earth to another dimension called the Abyss, which is apparently where the Mind Flayer and all the Demogorgons originally came from. We learned about the exotic matter that stabilizes the wormhole. We even got Brenner's old journals explaining the theory behind it all. The explanation given is that the wormhole is frozen at the moment of its creation. That's just how it works. Now here's where the debate comes in. Some fans feel this explanation is too simple, that it doesn't really tell us the mechanism behind why a wormhole would freeze time. The show sort of implies that it has something to do with 11 creating the wormhole when she made contact with the Demogorgon. Like maybe the sheer power of that psychic connection somehow locked the dimension in place at that exact moment, but the deeper mechanics of how or why this happens aren't fully explored. And that's what frustrates some viewers. They wanted more detail about the actual process. What makes this even more interesting is that the Upside Down wasn't created on November 6th, 1983. According to Season 5's revelations, the dimension that Henry Creel got sent to in 1979 was the Abyss. So the wormhole connecting Earth and the Abyss didn't exist until 1983, which means the Upside Down is specifically a bridge between two worlds, and it's a bridge that's stuck at the moment of its creation. The show tells us this is what happened, but doesn't dive deep into the quantum mechanics or supernatural forces that would cause this temporal freezing. Fun fact that a lot of people might have missed is that the exotic matter in the upside-down version of Hawkins' lab is what keeps the wormhole stable. When Nancy shoots it in one of the later episodes of Season 5, the whole bridge nearly collapses, and there's this massive hole that starts sucking everything into nothingness. So we know the exotic matter is important for maintaining the wormhole's structure. But whether it also explains the time freeze isn't made completely explicit. We know the matter is there, it's stabilizing things, and when it gets damaged, bad things happen. But the connection to the temporal aspect could have been more clearly stated. There are loads of fan theories trying to expand on this explanation, and to be honest, some of them dive deeper than what the show explicitly stated. One popular theory is that Eleven's immense psychic power essentially froze the moment when she created the gate. Like the energy released was so massive that it locked the wormhole's interior at that specific point in time. It's sort of like taking a photograph. The Upside Down is a snapshot of Hawkins on November 6th, 1983, preserved forever, because that's when the connection was made. This builds on what the show tells us, but adds more detail. Another theory is that it has to do with Will Byers specifically. November 6th, 1983 isn't just the day the gate opened, it's the day Will was taken into the Upside Down. Some fans think that Will's presence in the dimension somehow disrupted its temporal flow. Like he was this foreign element, someone with no psychic powers and no connection to the hive mind, and his presence caused the dimension to lock in place. It's a bit out there, but it's an interesting extension of the canonical explanation. There's also the Vecna theory. We know that Henry Creel, aka Vecna, was already in the Abyss when Eleven created the wormhole. He'd been there since 1979 when Eleven banished him. So when the wormhole opened, he was on the other side, and because he was connected to the Demogorgon through the Mind Flayer's hive mind, he was essentially part of the psychic link that Eleven made. Some fans think Vecna deliberately influenced how the wormhole formed, wanting a version of Hawkins that he could control and manipulate at a specific point in time. But again, this goes beyond what the show explicitly confirms. What some fans wish the show had done is provide more detail in Season 5. Dustin literally finds Brenner's journals about the wormhole and the exotic matter. There's a whole scene where he's reading through them and explaining to the others what the Upside Down actually is. Some viewers felt that would have been the ideal moment to include more specifics about the time freeze. Something like, according to Brenner's journals, the wormhole's interior is temporarily locked at the moment of its creation due to the exotic matter's quantum properties or whatever. Just a bit more scientific detail to flesh out the explanation we got. And here's another thing that makes fans want more detail. The show explicitly draws attention to the fact that things in the Upside Down are preserved perfectly. Brenner's journals haven't aged. The buildings and objects are in the exact same condition they were in on November 6th, 1983. Nothing decays or changes. This is really convenient for the plot because it means the characters can use things like the sensory deprivation tank or access Brenner's files, but it also raises questions about how this preservation works on a physical level. Is it magic? Is it science? Is it some combination of both? The show tells us it's frozen, but the nitty-gritty of how that works could have been explored more. To be honest, I think some fans feel the Duffer Brothers gave us the quote 5, but not enough of the quote 6. They told us the wormhole is frozen at the moment of creation, which is an answer. But they didn't dive deep into the mechanisms that would cause this to happen, whether it's quantum physics, psychic energy, exotic matter properties, or some combination. For viewers who wanted a more technical or detailed explanation, what we got felt incomplete. But for other viewers who are satisfied with knowing it's frozen because that's when it was created, the explanation worked fine. What makes this particularly interesting is the contrast with September 8th, 1979. That's the date when 11 sent Henry Creel to the Abyss. And the Abyss isn't frozen in time. It's a living, active dimension where things can change and evolve. So why does the wormhole freeze but the Abyss doesn't? The explanation seems to be that the wormhole is fundamentally different from a full dimension. It's a bridge, and bridges apparently freeze at the moment of their creation, while full dimensions don't. But this distinction could have been made more explicit. I've seen some people argue that maybe there's more detail in the show that clarifies the time freeze, and viewers just missed it because there was so much else going on. And look, it's possible. Season 5 is absolutely packed with information and plot threads. But I've watched the finale twice now, and while the basic explanation is there, frozen at moment of creation, the deeper mechanics aren't fully explored. Whether that bothers you depends on how much detail you wanted. Fun fact, the date November 6th shows up repeatedly throughout the series in various ways. It's not just the day Will went missing. In the stage play Sogtaishin Quote 7 He, which explores Henry Creel's backstory, November 6th is also significant in his past. It's the date of a school play that Henry was in, which Joyce, Hopper, and other Hawkins residents attended. The show seems to suggest that this date has some kind of cosmic significance, like it's a focal point for dark events in Hawkins' history. But even that connection is never fully explored or explained. The exotic matter itself is another piece of this puzzle that some fans wanted more clarity on. According to Season 5, the exotic matter in Hawkins' lab is what stabilizes the wormhole and keeps it from collapsing. It's apparently some kind of quantum material that Brenner was studying. When Nancy destroys it, the wormhole starts to fall apart. But if the exotic matter is what keeps the wormhole stable, does it also keep it frozen in time? Or are those two separate functions? The show treats them as if they might be related, but it never explicitly confirms whether exotic matter stability and temporal freezing are the same thing or different properties. What I find interesting about all this is that different viewers have very different reactions. Some felt the explanation that the wormhole is frozen at the moment. 11 created it on November 6th, 1983, was perfectly adequate. Others wanted way more detail about the supernatural or scientific mechanics behind that freezing. The show gave us an answer, but whether it's a satisfying answer really depends on what you were looking for. I think part of the issue is that Season 5 was trying to do a lot. It had to wrap up Vecna's storyline, explain the Abyss, deal with the military threat, give closure to all the character relationships, and set up the final battle. With all that going on, diving deep into the quantum mechanics or supernatural physics of temporal freezing probably felt like it would bog things down. The Duffer Brothers gave us the essential explanation. It's frozen because that's when it was created, and moved on. But for fans who'd been theorizing for 2 years and wanted more technical detail, it felt like there was room for more. So yeah, the upside-down time freeze got an explanation. The wormhole is frozen at the moment of its creation on November 6th, 1983. But whether that explanation is detailed enough is hotly debated among fans. We got the answer the Duffer Brothers promised, but some viewers wanted them to show more of their work, so to speak. Now, the time freeze controversy isn't the only thing the finale left people talking about. Let's discuss the characters who completely vanished from the story. One of the most frustrating things about the Stranger Things finale is how it just abandoned certain people. Like, they were important characters for multiple seasons, and then season 5 ends, and they're nowhere to be found. No explanation, no closure, nothing. They just cease to exist as far as the show's concerned. And I'm not talking about minor background characters here. I'm talking about people who had significant roles in the story and deserved better than to be written out without any acknowledgement. Let's start with the most egregious example, which is Dr. Sam Owens. Now, if you've watched the show, you know that Dr. Owens has been around since season 2. He's played by Paul Reiser, and he's one of the few government scientists who's actually on the good guys' side. Unlike Dr. Brenner, who is absolutely horrible and manipulative, Dr. Owens genuinely seemed to care about Eleven and the kids. He helped them out multiple times across seasons 2, 3, and 4. He was protecting Eleven, working against the more corrupt elements of the government, and generally being one of the more trustworthy adults in the show. In season 4, Dr. Owens plays a pretty significant role. He's working with Brenner to restore Eleven's powers using the Nina project. And when Eleven wants to return to Hawkins to help her friends, Brenner refuses and has his guards chain Owens to a rail inside the facility. It's this really tense moment where you see that Owens is trying to do the right thing, but he's powerless against Brenner's authority. Then Colonel Sullivan shows up, finds Owens chained up, and Owens pleads with Sullivan to spare Eleven. Sullivan ignores him, and that's pretty much the last we see of Dr. Owens in season 4. So what happened to him after that? Did Sullivan arrest him? Did he escape? Did he go back to working for the government, or did he go into hiding? We have no idea because season 5 never mentions him, not once. He doesn't appear in any scenes, nobody talks about him. There's no reference to what happened to him after Sullivan found him. He just vanishes from the story completely. And this is particularly frustrating because Dr. Owen's presence in season 5 could have solved a lot of the plot holes we're going to talk about later. Specifically, the whole issue with the military just letting everyone go at the end. If Dr. Owens had been around, he could have been the one to negotiate the group's release. He had connections within the government. He'd been working in these programs for years, and he'd helped the kids before. It would have made total sense for him to show up in the finale and use his influence to get everyone out of trouble. But instead, the show just pretends he doesn't exist, and we're left wondering what the hell happened to this character who'd been important for 3 seasons. According to some fan theories, Dr. Owens was probably arrested by Sullivan and imprisoned for refusing to cooperate. That would make sense given what we saw in season 4, but the show never confirms this. And even if he was arrested, you'd think someone would mention it. Like maybe Hopper could say, "I wish Dr. Owens was here. He'd know what to do," or something like that. Just a single line acknowledging that this person exists and his absence is notable. But we don't even get that. What's really interesting is that Paul Reiser is a pretty well-known actor, and his character was popular with fans. So it's not like the show couldn't get him back for season 5 if they wanted to. I think the issue is that the writers just didn't have room for him in the story they wanted to tell. They were focused on the main cast and the big supernatural threat. And Dr. Owens didn't fit into that narrative. So they quietly dropped him and hoped viewers wouldn't notice or care. But loads of people did notice, and they do care, because his absence creates problems for the plot. Now let's talk about Murray Bauman, who's another character that just sort of disappears. Murray has been around since season 2, and he's been consistently entertaining and useful throughout the series. He's this paranoid conspiracy theorist who turned out to be right about pretty much everything. He helped Joyce and Hopper, he translated Russian, he fought Demogorgons, he even had a romance subplot with Alexei in season 3 that fans absolutely loved. Murray was great. In season 5, Murray is definitely present for most of the season. He's helping with plans, he's providing comic relief, he's doing his thing. And in the epilogue, Murray does make a brief appearance at the graduation ceremony, sitting next to Mr. Clark and cheering on Dustin as he gives his speech. So we do see him there. However, unlike the main characters, who get extended scenes showing where they ended up, Joyce and Hopper getting engaged, Jonathan pursuing filmmaking, Steve working at a video store, Murray only gets this one brief moment. We don't learn anything about what he's doing with his life, after everything that happened, whether he stayed in touch with the group, or what his future plans are. While it's nice that he wasn't completely forgotten, the minimal screen time he receives in the epilogue feels disproportionate to his role throughout the series. He's been such a consistent presence that many fans wanted to see more about where his story ended up, beyond just a quick shot at a graduation ceremony. To be honest, I think this is part of a larger problem with how Season 5 handled its supporting characters. The show has added so many people over the years that by the time we got to the finale, there were just too many to give everyone proper closure. So the writers focused on the core group and let everyone else fall by the wayside, which is understandable from a practical standpoint, but it's still disappointing for fans of those characters. Then there's Vicky Dunn, and this one is particularly annoying because her storyline with Robin was actually pretty important in Season 4. Robin spent most of that season crushing on Vicky, working up the courage to talk to her, and eventually they got together. It was this sweet subplot about Robin finding someone who accepts her for who she is. And fans were really invested in their relationship because LGBTQ representation in the show has been limited, and Robin's character arc around her sexuality was handled really well. In Season 5, Vicky is around for some of the early episodes. We see her and Robin together, and everything seems fine. But then there's the scene where Dr. K and the military ambush the group outside the Mother Gate. Vicky is there during that scene. She gets caught up in the chaos along with everyone else. And then, that's it. We never see her again. She's not in the epilogue. Robin doesn't mention her. There's no indication of what happened to their relationship. The show sort of implies that Vicky might have given up information about the group's plan to Dr. K, which could have been what led to the ambush. But this is never confirmed, and even if it's true, we don't know if it was intentional betrayal or if she was coerced or what. The whole thing is just left hanging. And in the epilogue, Robin doesn't mention Vicky at all, which suggests they're probably not together anymore. But we never see them break up. We never get any closure on that relationship. It just ends off screen, and we're supposed to fill in the blanks. What makes this particularly frustrating is that Robin's sexuality and her relationships have been a significant part of her character development. So to have her romantic storyline just disappear without explanation feels like the show didn't value that aspect of her character as much as it should have. It's not that every relationship needs a happy ending, but they do need some kind of resolution. Even a single scene of Robin and Vicky talking after everything that happened would have been enough, but we don't even get that. There are loads of other characters who just vanish from the story as well. Argyle, who was a major character in Season 4, is completely absent from Season 5, which is a bit weird because he was part of the California crew and was friends with Jonathan and the others. Did he just go back to his normal life? Did he stay in touch with anyone? We don't know. Susie, Dustin's girlfriend, is another one. We know from the show that Susie and Dustin apparently broke up at some point between Season 4 and Season 5, but this all happened off screen. We never see them break up. We never see Dustin dealing with the aftermath. It's just mentioned in passing, and then never brought up again. And Susie doesn't appear in Season 5 at all, so we don't get her perspective on what happened either. For a relationship that was set up as being really important to Dustin's character, having it end off screen feels like a cop-out. Then there's Carly, also known as 8, who's another of Brenner's test subjects with psychic powers. Carly was introduced in Season 2, and she had this whole episode focused on her and her group. In Season 5, Kay kidnaps Carly as part of her plan to create more super soldiers using the DNA from Brenner's test subjects. Now, Carly's role in the finale is actually more significant than it might initially appear, and it ties directly into one of the season's biggest twists. Her sister Carly, yes, they're sisters in this version, actually cast one last spell to create a fake 11, so it only looked like 11 died. This is central to the finale's twist ending, and Carly's narrative importance is actually quite substantial. However, the way this is presented can feel rushed or unclear to viewers, and some fans felt that Carly's sacrifice and her relationship with her sister deserved more screen time and emotional weight. Given that she's one of Eleven's quote 9 from the lab, the emotional impact of her actions could have been explored more deeply. And here's a really weird one that I almost forgot about. In one of the earlier episodes of Season 5, Erica helps the group kidnap a family called the Turnbows. They're being used as bait to lure in a Demogorgon or something. The family gets tied up in a barn, and the plan goes ahead. But then the characters just leave. They run off to chase Demogorgons and deal with other plot stuff, and the Turnbow family is never mentioned again. Are they still tied up in that barn? Did someone go back and untie them? Did they escape on their own? We have no idea. The show completely forgot about them. Now, I know what some people might say, and that's fair, but the issue isn't that minor characters didn't get full storylines. The issue is that important characters just vanished without any acknowledgement. A single line of dialogue would have been enough for most of these. Dr. Owens is still in federal custody, but he sent word that he's proud of us. Done. Vicky and I decided to take a break after everything that happened. Done. That's all it would have taken. What's really frustrating is that the epilogue is 40 minutes long. There's loads of time to address these character arcs. Instead, the epilogue focuses on the main group and ignores everyone else. And I get that the main characters are the priority, but when you've spent 5 seasons building up a large ensemble cast, you can't just abandon half of them in the final episode. Despite all these missing characters, the show found time to include loads of scenes of the main group just hanging out and talking about their futures. Which is fine, those scenes are nice and provide closure for those characters, but it does make you wonder why they couldn't have included just a few more scenes addressing what happened to Dr. Owens, Murray, Vicky, and the others. It feels like a missed opportunity. To be honest, I think part of the problem is that Stranger Things has always been better at setting things up than it is at paying them off. The show is great at introducing mysteries and new characters and making everything feel connected and important. But when it comes time to actually resolve those mysteries and give those characters proper conclusions, the show often stumbles. Season 5 is just the most obvious example of this tendency because it's the finale and there's no more time to fix things. So yeah, loads of characters just got the short end of the stick. Or more accurately, got no stick at all. They vanished from the story, and we're left wondering what happened to them and why the show couldn't be bothered to give them even a moment of closure. But let's talk about something that's less about who disappeared and more about what suddenly appeared when it shouldn't have. The water that shouldn't exist. This one is just peak Stranger Things. Logic, honestly. No notes. Okay, so throughout the entire series, and especially in Season 4, the show establishes that there is no water in the Upside Down. Like, this is a consistent rule that gets mentioned and shown multiple times. When characters go to the Upside Down version of Lover's Lake, it's completely dry. The lake bed is empty. There are no puddles, no moisture, nothing. The implication is that water simply doesn't exist in the Upside Down. It's part of what makes the dimension so alien and hostile. Everything is dried up and dead. This makes sense from a visual and thematic standpoint. The Upside Down is supposed to be this twisted, corrupted version of the real world. Having all the water sources be completely dry reinforces how wrong everything is. It's unsettling and creepy, and the show makes a point of showing us dry lake beds and empty pools to really drive home that this is a waterless dimension. So with that established, imagine my confusion when in Season 5, during one of the most crucial scenes of the finale, Eleven needs to use a sensory deprivation tank to get into Vecna's mind. And where does she find this tank? In the upside-down version of Hawkins' lab. And not only is the tank there, but it's also conveniently filled with water and ready to use. I'm sorry, what? The show spent multiple seasons establishing that water doesn't exist in the Upside Down, and then in the finale, there's suddenly a fully functional sensory deprivation tank with water in it? How does that work? Where did the water come from? Why is this the one exception to the rule? Now, the show does try to explain why the tank is there at all. The Upside Down is frozen on November 6th, 1983, and Hawkins' lab existed on that date, so the Upside Down version of the lab has all the same equipment and facilities that the real lab had. That part makes sense, but the water, that shouldn't be there. According to the rules the show established, any water that existed in the Upside Down when it was created should have dried up or disappeared, but apparently this water is just sitting there, perfectly preserved, ready for Eleven to use. To be honest, this feels like the writers needed Eleven to use the tank for plot reasons, so they just put it there and hoped viewers wouldn't question it too much. Which, fair enough, the scene itself is pretty intense and emotional. When you're watching Eleven prepare to confront Vecna in his own mind, you're probably not thinking about the water logistics. But afterwards, when you have time to think about it, it's really quite jarring. What's really annoying is that there are ways the show could have handled this without breaking its own rules. For example, the characters could have brought water with them from the real world. They could have hauled containers of water through one of the gates and filled the tank themselves. It would have been a pain, and it would have taken time, but it would have been consistent with the established law. Or maybe they could have used the gate at the lab to create some kind of water transfer system. There are creative solutions that would have worked, but instead, the show just ignores the problem. The tank has water in it because the plot needs it to have water in it. And that's that. And look, I'm not saying this ruins the entire finale or anything. It's not that level of plot hole. But it is frustrating because consistency matters in science fiction and fantasy. When you establish rules about how your fictional world works, you need to follow those rules. Otherwise, it feels like anything can happen at any time for no reason. And there are no stakes because the writers can just change the rules whenever it's convenient. This isn't even the only example of the show breaking its own rules in Season 5, though it is probably the most obvious one. There are a few other moments where things happen that don't quite line up with what we've been told before. Like the way the gates work in Season 5 is slightly different from how they worked in earlier seasons. Or the way Eleven's powers function seems to change depending on what the scene needs. Small things mostly, but they add up. Despite the frustration, I do think it's worth noting that every long-running sci-fi show deals with this kind of thing. The longer a show goes on, the more complicated its mythology becomes, and the harder it is to keep track of every single rule and detail. Writers change, new ideas get introduced, and sometimes things slip through the cracks. It happens. But Stranger Things is only 5 seasons long. It's not like this is season 15 of a show that's been running for a decade. The Duffer Brothers have been in charge the entire time, so you'd think they'd be able to keep their own mythology straight. Fun fact, there's actually a whole Reddit thread dedicated to cataloguing all the continuity errors and plot holes in Stranger Things. And the water in the tank is one of the most discussed issues, because it's so blatant. Fans have come up with loads of theories trying to explain it. Some people think the time freeze might preserve liquids differently than it preserves other materials. Others think maybe the tank was sealed and the water was protected from whatever causes water to disappear in the Upside Down. But these are all just fan attempts to make sense of something the show didn't bother to explain. What's really interesting is that this kind of plot convenience happens in loads of shows and movies, and usually audiences are willing to overlook it if the story is compelling enough. Like if the scene with Eleven in the tank had been boring or poorly executed, people would have been even more critical of the water issue. But because the scene is actually pretty good and emotionally resonant, most casual viewers probably didn't even notice the problem. It's only the hardcore fans who've been paying close attention to every detail who get frustrated by it. I think part of what makes this particular plot hole so annoying is that it was easily avoidable. The writers could have written the scene differently to work around the no water rule. Maybe 11 could have used a different method to enter Vecna's mind. Maybe the tank could have been filled with some other liquid that exists in the Upside Down. Maybe they could have had a scene where the characters explicitly discuss the water problem and come up with a solution. Any of these options would have been better than just ignoring the established rules. There's also the question of what other things might be affected by the water issue. If the tank in Hawkins' lab has water in it, does that mean other water sources in the Upside Down have water too? Are there toilets that still flush? Are there water coolers with water in them? Or is it just this one specific tank that has water for no explained reason? The show doesn't address any of this, which makes it feel even more like a plot convenience rather than a thought-out element of the world. To be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if the Duffer Brothers just forgot about the no water rule when they were writing Season 5. They had so much other stuff to keep track of that this one detail might have slipped their minds. And by the time they realised the contradiction, they were probably already too far into production to change it. So they just went with it and hoped it wouldn't be a big deal, which, for most viewers, it probably isn't. But for fans who've been following the show closely and paying attention to the lore, it's definitely noticeable. Look, I love Stranger Things. I think it's a really fun show with great characters and mostly solid world building. But this water thing is just a bit too convenient for me to overlook entirely. It's one of those moments where you can see the puppet strings, you know? You can see the writers making a choice for plot convenience rather than for logical consistency, and that breaks the immersion just a little bit. And speaking of things mysteriously disappearing and reappearing, let's talk about the missing monster army. Now, you can't have 5 seasons of Demogorgons, Demodogs, and Demobats wreaking havoc, and then just not have them show up for the finale. But that's basically what happened. After building up this massive threat of creatures from the abyss for years, Season 5's finale was notably light on the sheer numbers of monsters we'd come to expect. In fact, the Demogorgons and Demodogs, creatures that had been central threats throughout the series, never actually make an appearance in the final episode itself, leaving many viewers wondering where they were during the final battle. And the reasons why make for interesting discussion. Let's start with the Abyss itself. According to Season 5, the Abyss is the home dimension of the Demogorgons and all the other creatures we've been fighting throughout the series. It's this alien world where the Mind Flayer lives, and it's apparently been trying to merge with Earth for decades. So logically, you'd expect the Abyss to be teeming with monsters, right? Like, this should be a dimension where Demogorgons are everywhere, where the sky's full of Demobats, where every surface is covered in vines and organic growths. But when the characters actually get to the Abyss in Season 5, it's more desolate than expected. While it's not completely barren, there's the Mind Flayer and the Pain Tree, where the children were held. The iconic Demogorgons and Demodogs that define the show's monster threats are completely absent from the final episode. These creatures appear earlier in Season 5, but their notable absence from the final battle is one of the most discussed aspects of the finale. The show even lampshades this through the characters, having someone comment on how strange it is that they're not being immediately swarmed. But just because you acknowledge something doesn't necessarily make it less surprising. So where did all the monsters go? We spent 5 seasons establishing that these creatures are dangerous, hard to kill, and numerous. In Season 1, a single Demogorgon was a massive threat. In Season 2, there were multiple Demodogs. In Season 3, the Mind Flayer had an entire army of possessed people. In Season 4, Vexna had swarms of Demobats. But in Season 5, when we finally get to the source of all these creatures, they're not present in the overwhelming numbers some expected. The most common fan theory to explain this is that Vecna absorbed many of the monsters to make himself stronger, or that they were incorporated into the Mind Flayer's physical form, like he needed their power for the final confrontation, so he basically sacrificed much of his army to boost his own abilities and that of the Mind Flayer. But this theory is speculation based on what we see rather than something explicitly stated, and it raises tactical questions. Why would Vecna reduce his forces when his enemies are literally coming for him? Another theory is that the Mind Flayer used the creatures to create and maintain its physical form, similar to how it used possessed humans in Season 3. Maybe many of the Demogorgons and other monsters were consumed to build and sustain the Mind Flayer's body in the abyss. This would explain why we don't see massive hordes, but again, this is viewer interpretation rather than explicit explanation. What's worth noting is that having a more contained finale with strategic encounters rather than overwhelming waves of creatures was a creative choice that some viewers appreciated and others found anticlimactic. Imagine if the characters had to fight their way through endless hordes of Demogorgons to reach Vecna. That would have been one type of finale, epic in scope but potentially exhausting. Instead, the show focused more on the core confrontation with Vecna and the Mind Flayer, with creatures appearing but not in overwhelming numbers. It's a different approach than what some anticipated. The show had established that the abyss is the home of these monsters. They showed us in previous seasons that these creatures can work together and coordinate attacks. They built up the threat level over 5 seasons. And then the finale took a different direction than some expected, focusing more on the main villains than on massive creature battles. Now let's talk about the final battle itself, which also had fewer monsters than some fans anticipated. Throughout the season, we'd been seeing Demogorgons and Demobats attacking various characters. There were definitely still creatures around in the Upside Down and threatening people in Hawkins. But when it came time for the actual final confrontation, the creature presence was more limited than some expected. The big climactic battle features the heroes fighting Vecna and the Mind Flayer, and while there are creatures involved, it's not the massive swarm situation many anticipated. There are Demogorgons present, but the focus is more on the coordinated team attack against the main villains, rather than waves of monsters. This brings me to an important point about how the final battle actually played out, which some viewers misunderstood. The defeat of Vecna and the Mind Flayer wasn't as simple or anticlimactic as it might have seemed at first glance. For Vecna specifically, it wasn't just Joyce swinging an axe that took him down. The actual sequence was much more complex. 11 managed to overpower Vecna and impale him on a spire first. Will used his connection to the hive mind and his own powers to break off Vecna's arm. This was after the whole group had been attacking Vecna in a coordinated effort. Joyce delivered the killing blow with an axe to an already severely wounded villain who'd been through a massive team assault. It wasn't a case of an axe magically being more effective than everything else. It was the final strike after Vecna had been seriously weakened by multiple attacks. As for the Mind Flayer, the battle was also more involved than just flamethrowers and guns. The group coordinated a multi-pronged assault. Dustin and Steve attacked the Mind Flayer from underneath. Nancy shot at it with her rifle. Mike, Lucas, and Jonathan threw bombs and flares at it. Meanwhile, Will tapped into the hive mind to disrupt it from within, while 11 battled Vecna's physical body in the Mind Flayer's chest cavity. It was a coordinated team effort, using multiple strategies simultaneously. So while the battles might not have featured the overwhelming creature, swarms some expected, they were more tactically complex than they might initially appear. The defeats of the main villains came after sustained coordinated attacks by the entire group working together. That said, there is a valid discussion to be had about power scaling. In earlier seasons, Demogorgons were established as being incredibly durable. They could take bullets, they could survive explosions, they were genuinely threatening. In Season 1, it took a huge amount of firepower and multiple people working together to take down a single Demogorgon. In Season 2, Bob Newby had to sacrifice himself just to slow down a pack of Demodogs. These creatures were serious threats. In Season 5's finale, while Demogorgons are still dangerous, the characters seem more capable of handling them, partly because they've had years of experience and have developed better strategies. But the shift is noticeable enough that some viewers felt the creatures had been nerfed to make the finale more manageable. Fun fact, this kind of evolution in how threats are portrayed is actually pretty common in long-running genre shows. As the series goes on and the stakes get higher and characters become more experienced, the baseline threats from earlier seasons naturally become more manageable. It's a natural progression, though it can feel jarring when you're used to these creatures being nearly unstoppable. What makes the creature presence in Stranger Things finale worth discussing is that the show had done pretty well with escalation up until season 5. Each season escalated the threat appropriately. Season 1 had a single Demogorgon. Season 2 had multiple Demodogs and the Shadow Monster. Season 3 had the Mind Flayer taking physical form. Season 4 had Vecna and the opening of multiple gates. The progression made sense, and each new threat felt more dangerous than the last. Season 5 then focused that escalation into the confrontation with Vecna and the Mind Flayer themselves, rather than adding even more creatures. It's a choice that emphasizes the personal nature of the final conflict. This is about defeating the masterminds, not just fighting endless minions. But it also meant that fans expecting massive creature battles throughout the finale didn't quite get what they anticipated. There's also the matter of how the hero's plan played out. In earlier seasons, the characters had to use clever tactics and exploit specific weaknesses. In Season 2, they had to close the gate to cut off the Mind Flayer's connection to the real world. In Season 3, they had to destroy the gate at Starcourt Mall. In Season 4, they had to use music to protect themselves from Vecna's curse. These were creative solutions that felt earned. In Season 5, the approach was more direct confrontation combined with strategic coordination. Getting into Vecna's mind through 11, attacking him physically while he was vulnerable, disrupting the hive mind through will, and coordinating attacks on the Mind Flayer from multiple angles. It's less about finding a single weakness to exploit, and more about overwhelming force applied intelligently. Different approach, but not necessarily simpler. I think part of the discussion around this is that the show tried to balance multiple elements in the finale. They wanted to wrap up the Vecna storyline, explain the Abyss, deal with the military threat, and give all the characters emotional closure. With all that going on, the creature battles became one element among many, rather than the central focus. But that's a creative choice the show made. If they'd structured the season differently, or extended the finale, they could have had more extensive creature battles alongside everything else. Instead, they chose to emphasize the confrontation with the main villains and the team dynamics, with creatures present but not overwhelming. Despite these choices, there are cool monster moments in Season 5. The Demogorgons are still scary when they appear. The Demobat swarms create tension. There are good creature design moments, but the overall presence of creatures is different from what some fans anticipated based on the build-up. To be honest, I think the show might have benefited from clearer communication about what viewers should expect from the finale. If the emphasis was going to be on the core villain confrontations rather than massive creature battles, that's fine. But some fans went in expecting one thing and got another. It's not necessarily better or worse, just different from expectations. So yeah, 5 seasons of building up these terrifying monsters, and the finale chose to focus more on Vecna and the Mind Flayer themselves rather than overwhelming creature swarms. The Abyss was more desolate than teeming. The final battles emphasized coordination over endless waves of enemies, and the villain defeats came through sustained team efforts rather than simple solutions. Whether that works for you depends on what you are hoping for from the finale, but the creature numbers aren't the only thing that stretched believability in the finale. Let's talk about what might be one of the most discussed conveniences of all: the military subplot resolution. I've gotten to this point in the video, and I need to talk about something that really divided viewers. The military subplot resolution, or rather, the lack of a clear resolution. So throughout Season 5, one of the major antagonists alongside Vecna and the Mind Flayer is the United States military. Specifically, there's this whole organization led by Dr. K, played by Linda Hamilton, who's trying to continue Dr. Brenner's work creating super soldiers with psychic abilities. Dr. K is positioned as a major threat. She's got resources, she's got authority, and she's ruthlessly determined to capture 11 and use her DNA to create more powered individuals. Now, Linda Hamilton being cast in this role was a pretty big deal. She's a legend, mostly known for playing Sarah Connor in the Terminator films, and her presence in Stranger Things suggested that Dr. K was going to be a significant character. The show sets her up as this brilliant but ruthless scientist who's willing to do anything to achieve her goals. She kidnaps Carly, one of the other test subjects from Brenner's program. She has 11 hunted. She's running military operations in the Upside Down itself. She's a proper villain. And then the finale happens, and the resolution to her storyline is minimal. After 11 seemingly sacrifices herself to prevent Dr. K from getting her DNA, the military presence in the story essentially evaporates. The main characters, Hopper, Nancy, Steve, Robin, Jonathan, and others, end up free to go home and resume their lives. No arrests, no extended interrogations, no obvious legal consequences shown on screen. This is definitely a plot point that requires some unpacking. During Season 5, these characters were involved in serious confrontations with military personnel. Hopper specifically kills several members of the military's Wolfpack unit while attempting to rescue Carly from an ambush. There's destruction of property, interference with military operations, confrontations with federal agents. These aren't trivial matters. In the real world, or even in a more grounded fictional universe, you'd expect significant legal consequences for these actions. Even accounting for the extraordinary circumstances, fighting to save the world from an interdimensional threat, there would typically be some kind of legal process, debriefing, or official accounting of what's happened. But instead, the show jumps to an epilogue where everyone appears to have moved on with their lives. Hopper not only avoids prosecution, but somehow gets his old position back as Hawkins' chief of police, and even gets offered a better job in another town where Joyce's kids will be attending school. Nancy goes off to pursue her education and career. Everyone seems to have returned to normalcy. The show doesn't explicitly explain how this happened, and that's where the frustration comes in for many viewers. There's no scene showing Dr. Owens, who's absent from Season 5, using his connections to smooth things over. There's no mention of presidential pardons or special dispensation due to the world-saving circumstances. There's no indication of what happened to Dr. K or what her stance is on everything that transpired. It's just resolved off-screen. Now here's where Dr. Owen's absence becomes particularly relevant. In previous seasons, whenever the group got in trouble with the government, Dr. Owens was often there to help resolve things. He had connections, authority, and was willing to use his position to protect the kids and their families. If Dr. Owens had been present in Season 5, his character could have provided a logical bridge to explain how everyone avoided prosecution. He could have negotiated, pulled strings, called in favours, or leveraged his knowledge of the situation. It would have made narrative sense. But Dr. Owens isn't there. He's completely absent from Season 5, as we discussed earlier. So there's no obvious in-universe mechanism shown for how the group avoids legal consequences. The show essentially asks viewers to accept that everything worked out, possibly because 11's sacrifice was recognised as saving everyone, or because someone off-screen handled the political fallout, or because in the chaos of everything that happened, the military decided to let it go. What's really interesting is that Dr. K herself just disappears from the story after 11's apparent death. She's there watching as 11 seemingly sacrifices herself, and she looks shocked and devastated because her entire plan is ruined. But then what happens to her? Does she face any consequences for kidnapping Carly and conducting unauthorized experiments? Does she continue working for the military? Does she harbour any resentment toward the group? We have no idea because the show never revisits her character. This is particularly notable because Dr. K is still alive, still has her position presumably, and still has all the same institutional power she had before. Yes, 11 is gone and Carly is dead, so she can't create super soldiers anymore. But that doesn't change the fact that serious incidents occurred involving her operations. You'd think there would be some follow-up, some final scene showing where she ended up, or what she thinks about everything, but she just vanishes from the narrative. There are fan theories trying to make sense of this, and they're worth considering. Some viewers think that perhaps the military decided to let everyone go, precisely because they were the ones with direct knowledge of the supernatural threats. The government might recognise that these people could be valuable consultants or assets in the future if anything similar ever happens again, so prosecuting them would be counterproductive. But this theory has gaps. If the government wanted to maintain relationships with these folks for future consultation, you'd expect some kind of official arrangement. Maybe they'd be required to sign NDAs, participate in debriefings, agree to be on call if needed. But there's no indication of anything like that in the epilogue. Everyone just scatters to pursue their own lives with no apparent strings attached. Another theory is that 11's heroic sacrifice created so much goodwill and public or governmental sympathy that charges against her friends were dropped as a gesture of respect and gratitude. She gave everything to stop the Upside Down and prevent a dangerous military program from creating super soldiers. So the least the authorities can do is let her friends and family move on with their lives. This has slightly more narrative logic to it, but it still feels incomplete. Even if there was institutional goodwill, there would typically be some kind of process. Official pardons, closed-door negotiations, political manoeuvring. Something to acknowledge that serious incidents occurred but are being set aside for specific reasons. The show doesn't give us any of that. We just jump to everyone being fine. To be honest, many viewers believe the real explanation is simpler from a storytelling perspective. The Duffer Brothers wanted a hopeful ending where the main characters could move forward with their lives after years of trauma, but they'd written a plot where those characters engaged in violent confrontations with military forces. Rather than spending screen time on complex legal and political resolutions, they chose to focus the epilogue on emotional character moments and where everyone ends up personally. The military situation gets resolved off-screen essentially. And look, I understand the creative impulse here. After 5 seasons of watching these characters suffer through supernatural horrors, viewers want to see them get some peace and happiness. The emotional payoff of seeing where they end up is what many people came for. And spending 15 to 20 minutes of the finale on legal proceedings and political negotiations might have killed the momentum and emotional resonance the show was going for. But you can't completely ignore the logical implications of your plot. When you write scenes where characters kill people, even in self-defense or defense of others, you create consequences that need addressing. You can do it quickly, you can do it efficiently, but you need to do something. Even a single scene could have helped. For example, a brief scene where someone, maybe a lawyer or a government official, or even just a news report in the background, mentions that all charges have been dropped due to the extraordinary circumstances and classified nature of the events, or a scene where Hopper meets with some federal representatives who acknowledge what happened but agree to keep it quiet and let everyone move on. Or even just a line of dialogue where a character mentions that Dr. Owens, from prison or from wherever he is, managed to pull strings one last time to protect them. Any of these would take maybe 2 minutes of screen time and would at least acknowledge that consequences exist. The epilogue is 40 minutes long. There's plenty of time devoted to showing where characters ended up and what they're doing with their lives. Adding one brief scene addressing the military situation would have fit easily without disrupting the emotional flow. But it's not there, and that's a choice the creators made. I think part of the underlying issue is that Stranger Things has historically been better at building tension and creating dramatic situations than at thoroughly resolving complex institutional or governmental complications. The show excels at character drama, supernatural horror, and emotional beats. It's less concerned with the nuts and bolts of how government organisations would realistically handle these extraordinary events. In earlier seasons, this was less noticeable because the government military presence was more in the background and the focus was squarely on the supernatural threats and personal relationships. But in Season 5, Dr. K and the military operation became major antagonists with significant screen time and plot importance. So when that entire storyline just kind of evaporates without clear resolution, it's more jarring than similar loose ends in previous seasons. It's worth noting that audience reactions to this have been quite varied. Some viewers barely noticed or didn't care. They were focused on the emotional conclusions for the main characters and the supernatural plot resolution. So the military subplot felt like background noise that didn't require detailed follow-up. But for other viewers, especially those invested in Dr. K's character or who think carefully about cause and effect in storytelling, this felt like a significant oversight that undermined the finale's otherwise strong emotional moments. I personally fall somewhere in the middle. I noticed the gap in the resolution, and it bothered me enough to think about it afterward. The lack of any explanation for how everyone avoided serious legal trouble is definitely one of the weaker aspects of Season 5's conclusion, but it didn't completely ruin the finale for me. The character moments still landed, and the resolution of the supernatural storyline was largely satisfying. It's just that this is one area where a bit more attention to detail would have strengthened an already good finale. Fun fact, this isn't the first time Stranger Things has had some logical gaps in its government-military plotlines. Season 3 had Russian spies operating a secret base under a mall in small-town Indiana, which requires a pretty hefty suspension of disbelief. Season 4 had Hopper surviving a Russian prison camp and escaping, which hand-waved some serious logistical questions. The show has always played somewhat fast and loose with the realism of its non-supernatural elements, prioritizing drama and character moments over strict plausibility. But Season 5's military plot resolution is probably the most noticeable example because of how much build-up Dr. K's character received and how abruptly that entire thread just stops. It's not that the show needed to turn into a legal thriller for the last 20 minutes, just that some acknowledgement of how this situation was resolved would have felt more complete. So yeah, the military subplot gets set up as a major threat throughout Season 5. Characters engage in serious confrontations with military personnel. And then in the epilogue, everyone is just free to go about their lives with no clear explanation of how or why. Dr. K vanishes from the story. Dr. Owen's absence means there's no obvious person to facilitate a resolution, and we're left to assume that somehow, off-screen, everything got worked out. It's convenient storytelling rather than thorough storytelling, and while it doesn't destroy the finale, it's definitely one of the more notable gaps in an otherwise emotionally satisfying conclusion. And that, my dear friends, is where we'll end tonight's video. We've covered 5 of the most discussed issues from the Stranger Things series finale. The upside-down time freeze that technically got an explanation, but left some fans wanting more detail. The characters who vanished without a trace. The water that shouldn't exist in the sensory deprivation tank. The notably absent Demogorgon armies in the finale. And the military subplot that resolved off-screen. These are all significant points that have sparked debate among fans about whether they're genuine plot holes or acceptable creative choices. Now, I want to be clear, I don't think these issues make Stranger Things a bad show. Overall, I really enjoyed the series, and there's loads of stuff that the finale did well. The character moments were mostly great, the emotional beats landed for many viewers, and the core supernatural plot came to a definitive conclusion. But these unanswered questions and creative choices are definitely worth discussing, especially for fans who've been following the show closely for years and have strong feelings about how everything wrapped up. In a future video, I'm definitely going to cover more Stranger Things content. There are loads of other debated points and unanswered questions we could discuss, like the details of Will's lingering connection to the hive mind, why Joyce and Hopper's former classmates didn't seem to recognise Vecna as Henry Creel, the ambiguity around Eleven's fate, and whether she actually died or if something else happened, the situation with Max's education timeline, and plenty of speculation about the various spin-offs that Netflix is apparently developing. There's plenty more to explore in this universe, and I'll be covering it when I get the chance. But until next time, stay safe and sweet dreams.